and great to meet everyone on here. My name is Ryan Fulton. I'm a senior account executive here at BerlinRosen. BerlinRosen is the Housing Collective's PR firm, and we've been their PR partner for the last 2 or so years. I come with a wide range of technology and IP, PR experience, but also some immigration policy and nonprofit experience as well. It's been great working with Mark and the rest of the team, and we are going to look forward to this hour or so being a good opportunity to talk through how we message. How that messaging goes, what the relationship with the reporter is, and how we really frame your organization's mission and create a powerful story. So I will let Chris introduce himself as well.
I think Ryan summed it up really well, but my name is Chris. I'm also senior account executive at BerlinRosen. I work with various nonprofits and public affairs organizations looking to amplify their media presence and handle inbound media inquiries professionally. That's what we're here to do tonight, teach everyone to do that in one fell swoop. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Ryan to get us started.
Chris, if we go to the next slide. Just a little bit of an agenda so you know what you're getting yourselves into today. We're going to start with a messaging overview, just talking about how we frame our message, how we talk about that message, and how, that sort of storytelling can be a force for you and your organization. Then we're going to get into some like more specific interview best practices, the do's and don'ts, the like what happens if you get asked a hard question, those sorts of things. And I don't want to scare everyone too much, but we will have a section where we have some practice and just ask you some questions and like build some experience of how to talk about you and your organization's efforts, like in an interview. And we have a section at the end here for some final questions and a wrap up. But please don't hesitate to leave us a question in the chat, to unmute yourselves, to raise your hand, all those things. We want this hour to be a time for you. So please let us know if you have any questions as we work through this. Cool. Kind of a continuation, but the goal of this training and the goal of us walking you through what a media landscape looks like. We want to boost your comfortability when speaking publicly about your work, and that takes a lot of different venues. Sometimes it is an interview with a reporter, but sometimes it's putting together an op-ed for yourself or speaking in a public assembly, those sorts of things. We want to refine those message delivery skills and prepare you for interviews with a wide range of audiences, with a wide range of mediums like a print or a video, those sorts of things. But we really just want to help condense this complicated subject matter, the like big policy goals that your organization have into consistent sound bites that people who might not be familiar with the space can still understand when they hear it. And we have this question of what you'd like to cover today, but I think the pre-survey did a great job of capturing that. But obviously, as we're going through, if you don't hear something and have a question for us, please let us know. Okay, so the messaging overview, Chris, if you want to go to the next slide. Before I get into the nitty-gritty, just want to talk about why we want to talk about messaging and why messaging actually works for how we talk about things. As an advocacy organization, as people who are working in these spaces that are trying to push change, messaging is really about changing minds and then therefore changing behaviors. We want to think about it because we want it to be succinct and easy to understand. We want this to be a quick soundbite that can be understood, that you can post on your socials, that sort of anyone in your life would understand what you're talking about. And that's kind of the next part, just meeting the audience where they are, understanding like who you want your message to go to, who the reader of Connecticut Public is, and really framing your own messaging and your own goals around that. And then lastly, this is kind of a thing that comes intrinsically, but for messages to be effective, your audience just needs to hear it repeatedly. a very life example would be like as a child when you're told for the first time, like, eat your vegetables, it's important. The first time you hear it and you're forced to eat a piece of broccoli, you might be a little upset. But as through our whole lives, as we learn these things, as we hear it repeatedly, it becomes something intrinsic and it causes us to, really make a change in our
Mhm.
everyday life to sort of
No,
adapt that.
that's
So
good.
kind of a wider thing. If we want to go to the next slide, Chris. Really powerful thing, just an effective message incorporates values. You and your organizations are like really well set up to talk about values, but an effective message is creating a shared value, not only with the people at your own work, but also with the people who are hearing the message that you're saying. And by creating a shared value, a shared understanding, you're able to reach and move more of your target audience to tangible action. And we'll talk about what that looks like. You'll be able to remind audiences why collective efforts matter, why it's important that they also do something, not just like cheer you on from the sidelines. And lastly, just for you to be able to sway audiences to take up your cause as their own and encourage the people in their own networks to also be invested in the sort of message and problem that you're looking to solve. So, what does that look like in practice? If we go to the next slide, we like to think about framing a message in three sort of buckets. We start with the problem, we move to a solution, and we end with an action. So, a good message is something that's short and compelling, but also offers a roadmap of how that problem will be solved through the actions that you can put forward. So the problem section is really just defining the problem that you're trying to solve. The second section is outlining a broad vision for a solution. And then the third is offering specific actions your audiences can take to solve that problem. So as we dig in to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what these buckets actually look like. Um, so the problem, when you're thinking about the problem that you want to talk, and like when we approach an interview, when we approach maybe an op-ed that you're feeling compelled to write, we want to think about the sort of problem that your organization is already working to solve and what that can be. And this framing should be broad, but it also needs to be clear. This is your opportunity to like outline what is urgent, and why people should care. So we want to make sure that the audience is affected by this problem, and really answering to them when they read this, like, why should we care? So this is really your first opportunity to frame the problem. And when you're going into an interview, when you're talking with a reporter, when you're speaking in a hearing, this is your opportunity to frame the whole debate, frame the whole whatever comes next in your messaging. So the second part of this, Chris, if you want to go to the next slide, the solution. So this is a broad vision statement. This is where you get to wax poetic about your organization and the sort of goals that you are really trying to achieve. And so you share what the answer to the problem looks like. And most critically, you're showing how that solution benefits something your audience cares about. I know before I was talking about shared values. This is when that comes into play. Now that someone understands maybe why they should care, now you have to like show how a solution is beneficial not only to the people who might be directly affected, but to you as the reader, you as someone who's getting this message or hearing your speech or your testimony. So we like to use values language. I feel like a lot of times when we're looking at data, when we're talking to people, we're convincing people from this like very proof point, like maybe we'll use some like economic data to convince people into something. This is your time to talk about emotion, to appeal to emotion and not just logic. Um, that can be focusing on broad concepts rather than concrete action. This is your time to talk in large scale about how a solution is going to help your community. Um, And it's really just your time to paint a hopeful vision of a better world. You've offered a problem that you're trying to solve, but now is when you get to talk about sort of the best case scenario for what that solution will actually do for the community around you. And then the last part of this is the action. So, just like when we talk about a lot of advocacy work, when we're sending an email and we're fundraising, this part of it is really like telling your target audience what they can do to join you. You've outlined a problem, you've laid this broad solution that's going to really help things. So now it's time to like tell people what they can do to help. Um, and most critically, people just have to believe they can have a direct impact. I think, we're often reading horrible things in the news that feel so big and feel so challenging to do our part to really resolve. But effective messaging is like also having that problem be framed in a way that people feel like they have a way to help. And so a good action statement to close this out is something that's both feasible and specific. So you're gonna want it to be something that someone can do, hopefully with not a lot of roadblocks. That could be, donating money. That could be calling your local senator. That could be, even just like having a conversation with people in your community. But it needs to be specific and it needs to be really, really tight on addressing the problem that you have laid out. So if you go to our next slide, we just do an example. As Mark said, this is through the Housing for All program. So we did choose something about affordable housing for this. Um, so, as many of you will likely know, there is a severe lack of affordable housing in Connecticut. So, if we were to tackle this, and I think there are many reasons we could want to tackle this as a problem. This is something that I'm sure a lot of your organizations are looking at. This could be to prepare for an interview with the reporter. This could be to, sort of outline an op-ed to be placed in a media of some sort. But it really helps to like stop and think about, the sort of framework that we did. So the problem here is that the housing crisis in Connecticut continues to worsen. Housing options are limited, they're driving up rents, and they're pushing people into homelessness or forcing them to leave the state entirely. And this is incredibly unsustainable. So if we think about the sort of like strategies that we looked at, the problem here it feels urgent. People are being pushed into homelessness. People are, living in a conditions that continue to worsen. It's easy to care about that. And you're really creating that shared value set with them. You're outlining a problem in a way that it feels really impactful. So then the next part of a message might be a solution. So this is when you get to say your organization is pushing for more safe, dignified, affordable housing options that will lower the cost of living, prevent displacement, and make communities more affordable and prosperous for everyone. Um, so you're giving people a tool that's to provide safe and dignified affordable housing options. If you're writing an op-ed, this is when you would get to talk about the sort of like specific legislation that might be exciting you, what could actually like affect the problem. And you get to paint this broad picture. You're making it clear that a solution to this is not only going to affect those who maybe are pushed into homelessness, but also you and your community, the people that you see every day, and you're creating this affordable and prosperous pace for everyone in your state. And then that can end with a call to action. So in here, that's support our organization by providing a donation for our efforts to find solutions to these issues at the local and statewide levels and ensure housing justice is a priority in Connecticut. This also could go many other ways. This could be contact your senator and tell them that you want to push for, maybe protections for just cause evictions. It could be to speak to those in your community about what they can do to speak to their local officials. Like there are many options here, but as you can see, we just want this messaging to sort of bridge the whole gap, offer a problem, offer the solution to that problem, and then move into an action. And Mark, I see your hand raised.
Thanks, Ryan. I just wanted to emphasize one point about this. I think often when we are advocating for something, particularly something as serious as housing instability, we tend to stay in the realm of the problem and we talk about the problem very often and only sometimes we talk about the problem and the solution. And then I think a little bit less, we might talk about the problem, the solution, and the action. Because we're all very familiar with the problem. Many of us are living the problem. So it's easy to talk about that. But as Ryan and Chris have pointed out, sometimes when we stay in the realm of the problem, it can actually scare our audience and make the audience shut down because they can't find their way out of that problem to the solution. So I just wanted to emphasize that it's critical, as Ryan has said, that we uh, not only introduce the problem, not only introduce the solution, but also introduce the action that people can take to bring about that solution.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think that's a great point. It's also like probably the part of it we want to spend the most time on and that takes the most amount of thought. It's also something that maybe feels intrinsic to your understanding from your organization. Like it's easy to spend so much time working on one angle, and like having that action be very clear to you. But sometimes that makes it easy to overlook offering an action to, someone on your neighbor, someone who might be reading an article or watching an interview with you. So it's a very critical part. Okay, Chris, if you want to go on to the next slide. Um, and this is where it gets creative. This is where it gets personal. But part of this whole project and part of what messaging is doing is really just storytelling. And it's talking about your organization, but also it's talking about your own lived experience. And by using your experience to talk about these problems, to offer solutions, it can create something that's really compelling. And this is what we like to tell people, like if they're looking to maybe get something placed as an op-ed, if they're looking to like write to an editor to get that featured, like these are the sorts of really critical pieces that are important to make people care. And Chris, if you want to go to the next slide. Um, this might feel natural and that's good, but a story is really important to making your messaging feel memorable and also feel like it has a lasting impact. By telling a story, by having an anecdote, it can help demonstrate real world experience and authority on an issue. And I think that can go in a way that's like even stronger than talking about maybe your role or having your title or like the experience or knowledge you have. Sometimes just having a story about how this has affected you can just make the neighbor, the community member who might be reading this just feel like you have the authority to speak to it and really help with that sort of shared value creation that we talked about. And then it just helps to build your own authenticity, and also your organizations. Like this is a critical part for making it feel like you are also affected by the things that you're advocating for, that it's not just like someone who has a wealth of knowledge and experience offering a solution, but not also understanding how it might affect a single person. By having a story, and we'll get into how we can start to talk about those stories and where those sources will come from. But it just helps make you feel authentic and make this really resonate with more people. And then the last point, and this is probably the most critical, but weaving personal examples from the vantage point of your work into your messaging just really helps to validate that message. We always want our message to resonate with the most amount of people. If you maybe get a quote in a story, but that quote is maybe more academic or maybe just like a data point. It's going to be impactful for the people who are already hooked, but it might be harder for those who don't have that resonation, who don't have that understanding to really feel impacted by what you're saying. So by telling a story, we get to validate that message and really broaden who your organization's work can appeal to. Chris, if you want to go to the next slide. Um, And here are a couple entry points to storytelling because I think, sometimes we don't always have a direct, like, housing affordability might be easy for all of us to feel because it's a crunch that all of us are affected by. But maybe your organization is more like homelessness services. Maybe you yourself haven't had that lived experience. There are still ways to tell a story and to have that entry point into creating this, like, more resonant, just like story moment to add to your thing. A couple examples. I took this job because it's a great one to get to talk about like why you are an authority, why your role is helping to address this problem and solution. Another one is I was just speaking with another partner organization the other day, and I can tell you this is like a way to bring in someone else's experience, someone else's knowledge, someone else's understanding. Um, and then the last one is just at a recent town hall I heard talking about like what you might have heard that resonated with your community, having that way to talk about how this problem is affecting you can be really effective and can just be a good way to bridge those gaps. Um, and I know that I just spent a lot of time giving you some advice there. So did just want to take a moment if anyone has any specific questions before we hop into some best practices. Okay, Chris, you can take it away.
All right. So, part two is we're going to focus on interview best practices. So, before we get into that, I also wanted to discuss briefly, building relationships with reporters. This can happen in a lot of different ways. Pitching is a very common practice, and it's basically just emailing journalists on um, what you want to speak to them about. Simply put, emails often the best form of best way to get in touch with them. That's where you'll be able to find most of their um, contact information on a given news website. Let's say you want to pitch a story on something you're doing in the affordable housing realm to CT Insider. They have a masthead on the page and on their website, and you'll be able to find their contact information there. Um, just a couple quick notes on that before we get into most of this really focuses on sort of reactive, like once you get interest from a journalist and or we also talked about this as broader applicability to in public meetings and such. But if you are to reach out to them, just make sure you're reaching out to the right contact. We don't want to reach out to a food reporter if we're trying to cover housing. I think it's fairly straightforward, but just reaching your target reporter, the people who are going to actually cover this. Um, and those follow-ups are good. Um, if you don't hear back, as someone who spends a lot of time pitching journalists and oftentimes doesn't hear back. Follow-ups are great. Um, I would say, you know, 2 to 3 follow-ups are good. You don't want to annoy them too much. They may block you. If it's not the right fit, you can always come back to them on a fresh thread at a later time. Mark, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just want to add that if you in your community are looking for a media outlet to engage with, or you have a story and you really want to tell it, but you're not sure where to turn, I would encourage you to reach out to us and um, we can help you do that. We can help you with a little bit of research about the media outlets in your community. If you want a second set of eyes on your email that you want to send to a reporter because you want to make sure it sounds accurate and persuasive, we're happy to help with that. So I just want to emphasize that, um, and I'll make sure I drop my email in the chat that when you go to execute these, we want to help make sure that you're successful. So we're here to support you with it.
Yeah, and the only thing I will add before I send it back to Chris, I think there can be some fear of doing this, but reporters are very receptive to learning about stories. And if you think about it as like making their jobs easier, giving them another article to cover, unearthing something that's interesting, um, it can be, remove that barrier of fear because this is like we often have really impactful stories that reporters care about, and they are just as excited to talk about it as you might be.
Yeah, I think Ryan sums it up well. It is a two-way street. And, I think this could be said more broadly for like all contact with anyone you're emailing or texting or calling, but, just keeping the tone always polite and friendly. Don't send them an angry email if they don't respond to you. So, hold out hope for future opportunities and just good etiquette. And if they get back to you, just make sure to reply to them in a timely manner, so they stay interested. But let's say you secure interest from a journalist or someone reaches out to you. If you have a communications department, I would say you should run it by them before you respond. It's a good best practice. If you don't have that, then we will walk through some best practices. I just wanted to see. I thought there was a message in the chat. Um,
Yeah,
I'm actually
I was just dropping the email address.
Oh, perfect. I just want to make sure because I'm screen sharing, I can't see that. That's great. Okay, so general best practices for engaging with press. We'll get a little bit more in detail here, but the broad overview is remember who your audience is, um, answer the question you want to be asked. Sometimes may not be the one that the journalist is asking, and you do that by incorporating your messaging. And last, and perhaps most importantly, you are always on the record. So, remembering your audience. When you're talking to a journalist, you are talking to them, but more importantly, you are talking to who their piece will reach. Whether it's a radio segment, TV, like, the news, or if it's just an online article. So, who is going to be watching this or listening to this, and what is it that you want them to hear? Could it be your partners? Could it be funders? Could it be people from the city or state agencies that are really important to get in front of? And if they were to remember one thing, what would that be? And that's often why with our messaging, we try to keep it really focused because, and we'll get more into this, but staying repetitive and staying concise is what's going to help the message that's important to you stay um, central in whatever the journalist is working on. And of course, the action. We talked about PSA, problem solution action. What is the action you want them to take, the audience via the journalists? And the last point here, yes, and this is just, and again, we'll get more into this. If you're asked a question and you may not necessarily want to respond to that, you want to, maybe say something that's more important to you. How do we, kind of bridge that gap? We'll get to that. So, an interview is not a conversation. That it feels unnatural to meet with another human being and not treat it like a normal conversation as if they were your neighbor or, your friend or family member. But that instinct is wrong. There's when you're interacting in these kinds of circumstances, like I said earlier, you're talking to their audience, and so you have to treat it as such. Being measured in what it is you want to say, and staying laser focused on what your messaging is. So sticking to those talking points, ways, those can be ways to sort of expand upon your messaging, providing examples, doing the creative storytelling that Ryan was talking about, what it is that the journalist wants from you, and how that ties in to what your goal and what your action you want the audience to take is. So again, that's not really how we interact when we're like, hanging out with our wife, our, husband, whatever. Like this is very different. So just those are some things to keep in mind. You're always on the record. I cannot emphasize this enough. You are always on the record. You can always say like, we'll get into the difference between on the record, on background, and off the record in a moment. But better safe than sorry. Always act as if you are on the record. Better safe than sorry. I can't stress this enough. Do not tell a reporter anything if you are not comfortable with it appearing as a direct quote from yourself in said story. That would be, not the most ideal thing to find out if it was something you didn't like that you said and then it ended up in the story. Again, the exception is if beforehand you've determined that the conversation is off the record or on background. But that it's also like, again, proceed with caution. Um, a little bit more on this. So, if you're on the record, your name is attached to the quotes you give. So when that story comes out, Jess Kubicki, I don't, she's at the Housing Collective. We used her for as an example here. Jessica Kubicki said dot dot dot. That would be how she would be represented in the story. If, let's say, Jessica spoke with a reporter and beforehand they very clearly established that this conversation was on background, the story, as it should be published, would say a housing collective spokesperson said, so on and so forth. And then off the record, this would be this they wouldn't appear in the first place. So the information could not be shared publicly. But as the slide mentions here, being off the record is not retroactive, and that doesn't really move the needle further unless in very select circumstances, if you really want a reporter to know something, but you absolutely cannot be attached to it whatsoever. Um, so we always say stick with on the record unless there's some sort of extenuating circumstance, and it's also just safe to expect that. Okay, so some interview basics. Talking in sound bites. This is across all mediums. Talking short and sweet is great. And, I think especially in a field like, say, housing and homelessness policy, it can be very easy to say a lot. And I think that can be a challenge sometimes. It also presents an opportunity to set yourselves apart. So that's, repeating the parts of a question so your answer is a complete thought, keeping your sentences short. And the next point, which is very important, knowing when to stop talking. Sometimes a reporter will just sit there and just be ready for you to um, just keep answering their question for as long as they'll have you. They're trying to learn, so they're just going to stay quiet. It's not a normal conversation. They're not going to butt in. They will often just let you ramble if you want to, but we recommend not doing that. Once you've delivered your key message, just pause. That's your power. Once you're done speaking and you feel like you've gotten that key message across, that's great. Then the reporter will move on to the next question. Um, and yes, as I think this is a very common human need. I do think that like do not feel the need to fill a pause. That is a very useful tool to keep in mind. And this goes a little bit into what I was saying about, talking in sound bites and keeping things short and sweet and accessible. Um, Avoiding jargon and corporate speak and acronyms and overly technical language, all of these things can dilute your message. And there are times where a reporter will meet with, what we would call like a subject matter expert in this field, and they may not run any quotes in a story because there may not be anything that they thought was worth including that really furthered the story. And so we do think that like to make sure that your interview you're making the most out of it and you're really doing your best to get included in said story is avoiding dense terminology. Sometimes I will say, sometimes like a housing dedicated reporter will know, COC, continuum of care, NOFO, like these sorts of terms that are like really relevant to the housing world. But always play it safe because at the end of the day, remember, it's their audience and they may not know these acronyms, and that's for the reporter to teach them. So yeah, can't can't stress all those things enough. And this one is also, this is very, very important. Never speculate. If the reporter asks you something you do not know, find a way to pivot to your original message, or you can just say like, let me get back to you. I'm not sure about that. Just it's okay to not know something, and you never want to be quoted um, for having said something that you do not think is true or you are not sure is true. All right. So, what if the reporter asks you something that you don't know or don't want to answer? This is probably the single most difficult part of this, bridging and pivoting. Um, using like acronyms to help you through these processes. It may work for some people, may not work for others, but we kind of call it like a ABC. So that's acknowledge, bridge, control. So if a reporter asks you a difficult question, instead of ignoring it, acknowledge the question and then bridge to your key message. So that's just a phrase often at the beginning of a sentence. And so you can say something like, well, I can't speak to that, but what I can say is, dot dot dot, then go on with your messaging. You could say something along the lines of, I think what you're really asking me is so on and so forth. These kinds of bridging phrases will bring you back to what it is you want to talk about. And you'll see politicians, a lot of times if they're asked a question they don't like, you'll notice how all of a sudden they're rambling and they're not answering the original question at all, but you're still kind of following along. You're like, wait, how did that happen? That's what this is. And what they come away with in that situation is control. When you kind of guide the messaging, when you do it on your terms, your key messages are what stick through when you continue to flag them. So, as part of this, there's always two sides to an issue, and this goes beyond affordable housing. This goes beyond, how to deal with the homelessness epidemic. This is very evergreen across pretty much any topic area. There will be opponents to a given issue. And one thing that when you're responding to folks, to journalists, is don't adopt your opponent's frames. Then it seems like their messaging is what is in control. So instead of being like, no, we aren't only supporting landlords. No, we aren't in a fight with the commissioner. It's just like when you say no, we aren't in a fight with the commissioner, that's basically half a word away from saying we are in a fight with the commissioner. Like that those sorts of, verbal cues like stick in people's minds. So this is where you would say something where you would do your ABCs. You would acknowledge it, you would bridge, and then you'd come away with control. So the real problem here is actually that, we have a shortage of housing and we need more supply to be built at deeply affordable levels. Then that's how you're, kind of getting away from that. So never, we recommend not starting a response by saying no, dot, dot, dot. Mark, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I always think of the example of former President Richard Nixon when he said, "I am not a crook." Um, because you don't want to, if you're saying that, you're kind of almost acknowledging something. I also want to share an example from right now in the Connecticut legislature. They're debating a bill in the Housing Committee, Senate Bill 151, that is about starter homes, adjusting zoning rules to make smaller homes. And, a lot of the opposition to this bill talks about how radical it is. And I noticed that one of the most prominent supporters of this bill in the legislature um, came out with like social media post, and the first words of the social media post were, "This bill is not radical." And I think that's an example of what we maybe don't want to do, because someone who's seeing that for the first time, their first engagement with this bill is that, oh, is this radical? Because this person's saying it's not. Maybe it is. So I just wanted to share those examples to emphasize what Chris was talking about. I think it's very easy to fall into this trap because you get like goaded by um, opponents or problems, but it's pretty essential that we don't fall into this trap and that we instead, as Chris said, pivot.
Thanks, Mark. I think that was really insightful. I'm going to use that Nixon example from now on. And to really emphasize the point of it being a trap, the giant mouse trap that's on the screen, I think illustrates our point. All right. So Moving on. This one. I would consider myself a rambler personally. And so this one to me is something that I have definitely tried to take to heart over the years. But reporters are trained to listen. And again, I already spoke about this, but I'll just go through this quickly. They take lengthy pauses. They want you to jump in. And this isn't always like necessarily like nefarious. Sometimes it's simply, they genuinely are curious. They may not know what it is you bring to the table. So they're just gonna sit back, let you listen, and then they'll parse what you've said later to, put together their story. But just it is just very important to remember that like you want to stay to what your core messaging is, and the more you deviate outside of that, the more you risk being quoted for something you don't like, that you did not want quoted, or just you may be cut out of the story altogether. You never know. So sticking to that core messaging is of the utmost importance. And a big part of that is knowing when to stop talking. Um, and just to, finish this slide here, making your most important point first and foremost is a surefire way to do that. If you're rambling and then you're like, "Oh, wait, I got to cut back to that point," then it might get lost. So, get it out of the way first and foremost is a good rule of thumb. Remember we said not to start a response by saying no. So this kind of continues here. Never say no comment. It makes you look like you're hiding something. It's it's hard because you may be caught in a position with a reporter who may be less than friendly with their questioning. But you still, when you're engaging with a reporter, you the ultimate goal is to advance your messaging, even and you have to put it on your terms. So I really like this is if you simply put, if you don't know the answer to something, you can just say, I'm not sure about that at this moment. Let me get back to you on that. That's like, worst case scenario. You can always say that. And then you're kind of, you're punting it off and you're protecting yourself, but it doesn't make you sound like you're hiding something and not contributing anything. Um, Always trying to go back to the answer you want to be asked. And, like we covered a little bit earlier, the biggest part of that is bridging. Okay. So this, I know I've been talking for a while. I want to stop for your questions afterwards, but I really just want to wrap up this part here by talking about what the last question a journalist will ask you is. A lot of times they'll say something like, "Do you have anything else you want to say? Did I miss anything?" And for the third and final time, don't say no. Go back, even if you've said it several times already, repeating your core messaging increases your odds of getting that included in said story. So this is a perfect opportunity to say your message clearly and concisely on your own terms. It's very important to get this in if you are offered this opportunity, which journalists will often do. So again, just be okay with repeating yourself and make sure that end the interview on a strong note. Okay, so before we get into some practices for different mediums, does anyone have any questions?
Um, I want to and she told me I can do this, so I want to put Tanya on the spot for a second. Tanya is a resident leader in Niantic, and we actually just worked together on a article. So Tanya just had an experience speaking to a reporter. And Tanya, I was hoping you could maybe share some of your experience. What surprised you? What did you like and not like? What do you wish you knew going into it?
I think that I have had been in the paper way too much. And always think the one thing that I think bothers me the most is you don't know what the questions will be. So it's like you're completely on the spot. And it's like you have to think quickly. And sometimes you do go into the rambling because you're like, oh my God, what did I want to say about this? And sometimes you don't have clear thoughts. But the interview I just had is about what's happening here in my building, Alpha Capital, who is we consider him like a slumlord. He's buying up buildings and giving no fault evictions and raising rents by 100%. And the article was about housing over the years. So because I did have a lot to say, I think I rambled and I was like, man, I wish I had this class ahead of time because now it really goes through make your point, make it short, make it sweet, and just that's it. But sometimes you get so excited about what you're talking about, you sometimes ramble.
Thank you, Mark, and especially you, Tanya, for jumping in there. Um, all the points we gave, like, Rome wasn't built in a day. Like, these are aspirational, these are guidelines. Like, they're the points that I really emphasized, really avoiding, lying and always being ready to be on the record. Those are the most critical, bedrock foundation things here. Everything else is to help guide you. You may ramble in an interview. If something is difficult, like that comes with the territory, but that's why we're here to try and, improve everyone's media skills so that when the time comes, you are as equipped as you can be. It's a work in progress for sure. Okay. Well, I will walk through some best practices here for different mediums, and then I think we'll go into some practice after that. Ryan, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, just one quick thing. I know one of the questions that you guys asked in the pre-survey was about how to deal with misinformation. I think the bridging tips that Chris offered are kind of a great way to tackle that. If you are hearing something that is being like maybe incorrectly said to you, or the reporter is like not fully there, that's when you can use a term like, I wouldn't put it that way. I would say like those tools are a very effective way to sort of like fight against that. And sometimes that misinformation can just like be like a leading question that a reporter might ask. But being able to like confidently turn the conversation is kind of a great way to get around that. So just wanted to touch on that before we move on.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay. So, print. Print slash digital, or online, as I like to call it. Print newspapers are increasingly rare these days, but still a lot of news lives online and through historically print news outlets. Um, in these kinds of stories, jokes and subtlety and sarcasm, they are great in everyday life, but in these kinds of stories, they do not translate well. You always want to make sure what you're saying is earnest and you know, not veiled with sarcasm or subtlety. You want to make your points clear and concise. Um, and yes, only a few quotes are included in a given story, at best. So when you are being interviewed, it's really coming back to repeating your messaging. And you notice my messaging tonight for this is to really encourage you all to repeat your core messaging. So if you feel like every slide I'm saying this, there is a reason. It's so you remember it. But yes, so really, I do think that is important. And in line with that, memorize a good soundbite. If you feel like your ultimate line is, yeah, if you feel like there's one sentence that really encapsulates what you're saying and has a little bit of, flair that can really capture that and will stick out in the journalist's mind, memorize it and then just be ready to say it throughout or at the end. TV. TV at times can be a little scary. But here are some good general tips for how to appear and how to do well. It is a visual medium. So sitting in front of a wall that is not too busy, not too bare. I think my wall behind me is like an okay example. I mean, I have it blurred. But I have, there's like a plant here and some frames. It's like, that's good. You don't want it to be like maybe your kitchen and like your kids are running through it. I feel like there's a lot of infamous blooper reels of things like that happening. And you don't want it to be like too bare either. You want to have like, a memorable place where you're sitting. Um, if you are, on camera for something like this, avoid dressing in patterns or logos or heavy jewelry, keeping it simple, but overall well dressed. And jewel tones and bright colors look really good on camera. I think the famous example to bring it back to Richard Nixon is a lot of people judged his performance in I want to say the 1960 presidential debates off his like pinstripe, or it was like a patterned suit, whereas JFK had a monotone suit and he looked very clear cut and dapper, and Richard Nixon seemed kind of like, you know, disheveled, even if he really wasn't. So a lot of those perceptions are important. Um, and then just these are some really basic ones. If you are connecting remotely, always do a practice run. Make sure that Zoom link works and make sure that internet is acting, it's up to speed. My internet was giving me problems earlier today, and I knew I had this training, so I made sure that I reset my modem. I made sure everything was up to speed to make sure there were no, issues or gaps or delays. So can't emphasize that enough. Um, and don't sit in front of any windows. It can diminish not only diminish the quality of your video, like we say in the slide, but like if the sun is shining through at a weird angle, you might be cast in shadows, you might be half shadows, half, covered in light, or you might be like, fully covered in light and no one can see you. And we don't want that. So, um, just a little bit more about TV. Just like, incorporate the question as a statement in your response. If you're bridging, especially, you can say like, oh, yes. So to answer your question on affordable housing here, what I really think we need to focus on, dot, 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 like that really, keeps your statement, whole and concise. Body language, hand gestures, just don't look stiff and still, but don't also be like flailing around. Those sorts of things, um, are not best practices. Um, and yes, I think like I've heard this with dancers as well. When people are like on stage giving some sort of performance, the absence of a smile looks like a frown. So that's, keeping a polite smile and always remembering the camera's on. Kind of being like on your best behavior is just like is a good best practice as well. Um, so Okay, and this last one here of avoiding sounding monotone, I think that's important as well. Using, I think, the tone and how you speak and conveying what is important through the very way you speak, emphasizing various important words or phrases is also a really important thing to do.
And
Hey,
Chris, just
Chris.
wanted to read a question that was put in the chat that I
Great.
think Mark was about to do from Sabrina. She asks, especially for a video interview, how would you handle having a strong message that you want to get across that may be perceived as negative and combative, but is simply just you shedding light on the topic? As a fair housing officer, I deal with heavy topics such as racism and unfair treatment.
Hmm. It's a good question. I think, my recommendation is to come back to what we discussed initially, problem, solution, action. So those sorts, and it's hard because there may not be an immediate action you have in mind, but I would encourage you to think through what each of those levels are. It's human nature. People look for aspirational messaging, and people will remember a call to action versus just someone explaining the problem. So when that happens, I would recommend detailing that problem. I would do it concisely, but don't spare details if you feel like they are important to share, especially with a subject matter as important as, fair housing and discrimination. And then I would encourage you to determine what solution and action is that you would be looking to incorporate, and also ultimately, um, going back to the practice of, not rambling, like finding a way to do it concisely for a TV segment that may only be a few minutes.
Yeah, I think Chris did a great job of putting that forward. I think like the, you know, by nature of the sort of work that you all do, like some of your takes will be combative to others. Like that's just the nature of the advocacy that a lot of you do. But the proper framing and this like move towards a solution and a strict call to action can help that from seeming like negative, even if you might be talking very strongly and very forcefully about something.
Thank you for your question. That was great. All right. Well, without further ado, um, it is practice time. So, um, sorry, just seeing Katrine's comment. I figured out how to access the comment section while sharing my screen, so very exciting. Um, so with practice now, Ryan and I have prepared some for folks. We're gonna kind of, we'll do a few, and we'll escalate a little bit in difficulty, but we'll start out easy. Do we have any volunteers? I'm not above picking on people as well. Okay.
Teresa, I don't want to pick on you, but I remember during our meeting last week, you had a lot of good things to say, and I wonder if you might be willing to be to participate here.
Depends. Exactly what would you like me to try to do?
I actually was going to ask the same thing. If anyone speaks, Teresa, and then I could go off her. Teresa can begin if no one else, but
Okay, well,
absolutely.
what would you like me to do?
Yeah, I'm happy to walk through that. Teresa, if you could just start by maybe giving like your name, the organization you work with, your job, then Chris and I are just going to ask like we'll ask you an easy question about housing affordability or something in that realm. We'll ask you like an intermediate one, and we'll ask you a hard one. We just like are trying to try to like build that familiarity. Like the unfortunate part of interviewing is that it is hard, and like Tanya told about her experience, like these skills are just so practice based. So in this very like warm environment where there are no wrong answers and no consequences, we just want to practice through that.
I would rather not, if you don't mind,
Okay,
because it makes me anxious. So I'd rather just listen.
sure.
Now, I'm not sure if you can go ahead and do it with me. It may be a lot of I don't knows, but at least we can practice. Because I am fairly new to the housing collective with light, but I am not new to situations and being out there boots on the ground. However, new to things being done a certain way policy wise, and um, interviewing without using emotion, having your emotions but not being emotional. So I've been practicing on these things too. So I mean, you can ask questions, and I'll do the best I can do, and like a
That
lot of it
sounds
may.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And yeah, we'd love for this to be a low pressure situation. Katrina, if you could just start with maybe where you work or who you represent, and then we'll dive in.
Okay, well, my name is Katrine Lamb, and I was chosen to be on the Housing Collective Light Advisory Board, and Light stands for Lived Experience Initiative for Transformation, formerly Open Doors, Fairfield County. Um, that's where I'm from. Like I said, I was chosen. I was out there, boots on the ground, before I became unhoused, and and with being unhoused, I found out a lot of stuff that I needed to get answers for people that had no voices. So
Great. Yes, thank you so much. So we'll start real easy with you.
okay.
Um, can you talk about why the homelessness crisis in Connecticut is so urgent?
It's urgent to me because, as I said, I am one of the unhoused. It's urgent because basic. I was thinking about that earlier actually, and I said, going before you're going to be all articulate and say it this way, but basically, it's a basic human right um, to have housing. It's difficult for me to to work the way I want to work, to do what I want to do without being having a safe place to know I'm going to. So pretty much it's a basic human right to have somewhere to be comfortable.
Yeah, thank you. And just to go off that first one, the storytelling that you did there, and I know we talked about this, is like really powerful in the way that that wrapped into your response and how it connected to the problem was like exactly the sort of thing that we're pushing for. So, easy question, lovely. Thank you for your help. A more intermediate one. What do you think the biggest obstacle to solving the homelessness crisis is for legislators to maybe take action?
Mindfulness, not being have been in that situation or close to that situation. Mindfulness, um, funding, definitely funding. Enough people to be there that care, but funding actually is funding. You
Yeah,
know.
I think that's great. And the way that you repeated and made it clear and concise is like on the points that Chris was laying out in our interviews, and also agreed as people who work in that. Um, a harder question for you.
Mhm.
Um, we are seeing a federal administration that might not be interested in solving a lot of the homelessness crisis problems that are in the country and also in Connecticut itself. Um, what is the holdup?
Mm. I go back to mindfulness, caring. That's a difficult for me one for me because the system didn't work for me as well as it worked for others. So that's a little difficult for me to answer in a fair way. Other than saying caring and funding, I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that is great. And that hard question is like obviously as someone of lived experience, a reporter may ask you something that like
Mhm.
might elicit an emotional response and be like really deep and meaningful. So I think you handled it well, and made it come back to those priorities that you did. So even if you might not have gone into us in our practice round with like some messaging bullets, you did a great job of like
Okay.
getting back to that.
Okay. See, now
So
I need to. I like the feedback because I can't use the message. I try not to. I would get so much. I'm not one that would ramble. That would go on. It means so much to me that I want to give you everything that means that's important to me. That may not be the time to say. Give that perspective. Because it's so important to me. So you know, that's why I said, use me. I need that back and forth to know exactly where to go to make it more meaningful, more impactful to the person I'm speaking to, the people, to the audience that I'm speaking to. So
absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Katrine.
my pleasure.
Um, and we will ask just, is there anyone who would also like to be asked a couple questions? I know we're asking a lot of you late on a Thursday, but is there anyone
I
else who might
actually,
be interested?
I actually would be open to trying.
Yeah,
Katrine
thank
did
you very
such a good job. She was so brave, and I'm like, okay, I was scared, but I'll try.
much.
Thank
And that's like
you.
a lot of
Queen of
interviewing is scary. And so like building familiarity with just like being able to do it is important. So we appreciate that from both of you. Chris, maybe you want to ask these questions?
Yeah, I got it. Thank you for volunteering, Sabrina. We appreciate it. Um, First of all, can you tell us a little bit about your role and what it is you do?
Yeah, so I am the Fair Housing Officer for the City of Norwalk, and that role entails handling and investigating any discrimination complaints that come through to the city, as well as advising the city's government officials on how to handle fair housing policies.
Okay, great. So, can you tell me a little bit about what is at stake if we do not address creating more affordability in our housing across the state?
The issue with the issue that happens if we do not address affordability and the lack of housing in the state, specifically in the southern part of Connecticut, is going to be that we are going to drive out young professionals who cannot afford to stay here. And we are also creating less spaces for people who are growing into a different phase in their life. So, like the senior population as well. We need to create spaces that can not only welcome in and keep our young professionals here, but also where they can grow and live here for the years to come. So that has a lot to do not only with housing affordability, but also with the lack of housing and the lack of investment in housing that is happening currently.
That's great. And earlier you mentioned that finding, mentioning a solution, like what happens if you have a lot of heavy things to talk about. I think you did a really good job there of actually bringing up a solution that like we need to build more. It's straightforward, but it's doable.
That was scary. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm like, I know the answer somewhere in my brain, so I'm trying not to take too long between like when you're asking what I'm speaking.
And remember this, you have the power when you're interviewing with someone, with a journalist. It's on your terms as well. And those kind of pauses, if you need a couple seconds, then that's okay. I didn't think your delay was anything like that would be, you know, an issue. So, and I would let you know if it was.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you
so
guys.
so good first question. I want to try one that's a little bit more difficult, if that's all right. Um, so. Just give me one second here. Um, why is housing so much more expensive here in Connecticut than in other states? What's going on there?
I cannot speak to the affordability of other states because affordability is so subjective. However, here in Connecticut, what I can say is that the wealth disparity gap that we do experience here is unprecedented compared to places that you may find in the central part of the country. However, I do understand that they have their own affordability issues. Here, we do deal with very unique circumstances. So that's kind of what I would say. I'm not quite sure. That would be a curveball for me, I think.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I thought that at the beginning, the way you bridged the question, that's like a textbook example. I thought that was like really perfectly done. No notes on that. I will say, like you mentioned, like, oh, in the central part of the country, they may have their own affordability challenges. What we said earlier, is, to not speculate. So at the beginning, what you said was enough. It was like, I can't really speak to that, but what I can tell you is here we have a affordability problem. Um, so like that's good. That's enough. Um, and if there is something that you feel like you can't really get more into, then you can always just stop. But so overall, I thought that was well done.
Thank you guys. That's good notes to hear because sometimes that rambling aspect of this really hit home. I'm gonna try to practice on that a lot more.
Plus, you had the cat coming in for some loving too. So you got,
Yeah,
you
the
know.
Real-time
distracting
distraction.
background definitely another thing because she's sitting on my lap. It was a whole thing.
She has something to say. We need to listen.
She felt my anxiety. She said, "Let me
Yes.
come and calm you down."
How would you feel, Sabrina, about a hard dist question?
Okay. Why
I think
not?
you can
It's
do
fine.
it.
Yeah.
So, um, okay. So isn't this all really about forcing towns to change against their will? Are housing advocates ignoring community concerns?
Housing advocates highlight community concerns and they address the conversations that people are having in their own homes around dinner time. There are a spectrum of housing advocates, and they really want to continue conversations that are already happening.
That was well done. That was good. That one's a really that was I want to
Absolutely.
be asked that
Thumbs
point.
up.
Ryan or Mark, do you have any feedback there? I thought that was good. It was short, it was sweet, and the reporter, the imaginary reporter in this circumstance obviously had kind of a slant in that question, and you nullified it, I think.
Yeah, no, I would just echo everything Chris said. I think like you knowing when to stop and just like answering the question at the utmost, like just sort of like does it. And yeah, like Nancy pointed out, like turning the verb around and like highlighting that and using the framing to reinforce what you're saying is like really smart and
Yeah.
really effective for reporters.
Yeah. I thought that was perfect, Sabrina. I think one thing that you can also do is say what you said, and if you have it, offer an anecdote from your maybe you've worked with someone who has expressed a concern to you about affordability. So you can say exactly what you just said, and then um, I was in the community the other night working at, a table at a community event, and someone came up to me and said, da 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 da. Kind of like what Ryan and Chris said earlier about, well, I recently heard at a town hall meeting,
Yeah,
just to kind of really even drive home the point even more that like I'm in the community and this is what they're saying.
perfect. Okay, yeah, that's good too.
Yeah, not to take away from what you did offer, because yeah, what you did was a perfect flip.
No, I'm here to learn, so thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Of course. Do we have anyone else who's interested in doing a final question or two?
I would be happy to volunteer with as much terror as has been expressed previously as well.
You got this, Lisa. Ryan, you want to ask this?
Yeah, happy to. Lisa, do you want to walk through who you are and what you work with?
Sure. My name's Lisa Salman, and I am very new to this whole housing arena. It's something I've cared passionately about for a while, but haven't really done anything. But now we're starting a new organization in New Haven called Neighbors for Housing. And I'm really excited to have an outlet for my concern about the housing crisis that we all face.
That's great. Okay. Uh, so this new organization that you're working with, what role are they playing in creating an affordability solution?
So, Neighbors for Housing, we're just forming, but our passion is for increasing the supply of housing. That ultimately, the problem that so many of us face is finding housing that we can afford, and that this hits people at every end of the income spectrum. And the solution to this is more housing. And citizens, neighbors, members of the community can advocate for more housing in so many different ways, showing up at public meetings, pushing for legislation at the state and local level, talking to our neighbors about the housing crisis. Um, there are a lot of ways to show up on this, and we're excited to kind of navigate our way through that.
I think that was great. And I think what you did really well in that answer was just offer your solutions at the top. Like you gave those, of course, in an interview, a reporter is likely going to ask you further questions that you might have been able to give those solutions. But by like saying it in the first response and like kind of turning my like curveball question or softball question that was like very easy into an opportunity for you to like really lay a larger messaging down. I think that was great. The action was very clear. Um, a question I have for you. Some towns in Connecticut say that they're already doing their fair share to build more housing. How would you respond to that?
Well, when I talk to people who are looking for housing, maybe a young person moving to be near a job, or a family that's ready to move into a larger apartment, or a senior citizen that wants to downsize, sell their house and move into something smaller, in towns throughout Connecticut, all 169 of them, people cannot find the houses that they need.
That's great. And I think you did a really good example of having an anecdote that wasn't even about your experience, like looking for a new house or struggling, but talking about community experience and the conversations that you're having. It's a great way to be able to like do that storytelling, but also not necessarily be about you. So I thought that was very well done. And Mark,
And
I saw you
y
unmuted.
yeah, and if I can just offer, I think you didn't it's like what Chris and Ryan said, where you kind of answer the question that you want to answer, not necessarily the question they're asking you. Because you could have said, well, the towns are wrong when they say that. But instead, you said, well, what I'm hearing from residents is ABC. And that suggests that maybe what the towns are saying isn't so accurate, but you're not saying that because saying that would be, you know, being negative or trying to so yeah, I thought that was really well done how you pivoted.
I really appreciate the encouragement to not answer the question.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean, as PR professionals, unfortunately, our job is to like tell you to just say the things you want to say. And it might seem a little dishonest, but that's not really what it is. It's just like about getting your message out there. And it can feel weird at first, but it's important and you did a great job of it. And now the time has come. Lisa, I'm going to ask you a harder question. I'm sorry. Uh, why should a homeowner who bought their house decades ago and didn't struggle to buy it support more housing development now?
Well, a lot of homeowners who are my age and bought their house decades ago may have children who are looking to buy a house in their own community. And I've seen my own kids pay exorbitant prices and n- fear that they will never be able to buy a home. And I think this is something we have young people in our lives, either children or nieces and nephews. So picture their experience and think about what it will be like for them in your community.
That was great. And I think what you did there was like create that shared value, like even with, something that I asked from a slanted question where like I was already leading that people might not care. You did a good job of like still connecting it to something that will resonate with a lot of people who are reading it. So I think that was very smart framing. Um, okay. Well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for working with us through that. Before we close out for tonight, as I know we're coming out on time, any questions now that we've maybe like put some of this into practice about anything we said? Is there anything that you wanted us to cover maybe that we didn't? We'd love to hear from you. Okay.
Um, can
Oh,
I?
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So I gave public testimony at the whatever it is HB 151 thing yesterday. Was that yesterday? Day before yesterday, and I was really irritated that people were saying, local control. We'll sit down with you and figure this out together. And what I wanted to say in my testimony and did say is that local control has been tried for 50 years and it has given us the crisis we're in. Like, it's not working to solve the problem. That does not align with any of the notes I've taken of your of this presentation. Is there some way to like address like people who are saying let us try local control that kind of takes advantage of all these lessons that you're sharing?
I think this is my gut reaction, and obviously, please, Chris and Mark, jump in. The way that you even explained it, where you talked about, like, in my experience, I've sat through this conversation, I've heard people try this, and it has not worked. Like, that can be a helpful framing device just to, like, show your lived experience through this, and then still be able to talk to it. Sometimes you're just like going to be entirely opposite to someone else when you're talking, and that's not inherently bad. We just have to think about like how you make yourself an authority. And by saying that like you've sat through this, like you've sat through these conversations, maybe even participated in them before, you get to validate yourself in a way that like makes your message stronger.
And I think what Ryan said is completely on the nose. I think, you're coming from a personal perspective. You're doing that storytelling. Um, And as long as you include a solution in action, I think there is like I think it's like I don't really have many notes there. I will just say one thing to be keep a close eye on is, if you're in that circumstance and maybe a reporter's there and they ask you about this, don't start by saying like they're like, "Oh, so do you think they're right?" Don't say like, "No, they're crazy." Even if that's what you believe. Find it's going back to that sort of acknowledging and then bridging. So like you could be like, well, in response to your question, what I think we really need to be focusing on is and dot dot dot. Like don't play into the like if you say no, what they're doing is bad, then it may not really further your case.
Yeah, and I'll add, and Lisa, because I know that your group is based in New Haven, and New Haven recently made a change to your zoning code that was positive and progressive, and your group was kind of involved in that. So when Chris and Ryan talk about adding a personal note to it, you could say, um, for example, um, you know where I live in New Haven, the city actually, we just personally took action to advance housing. So it's really not a question of local control or not, because it's not an either or. We can have people at the local level taking action, and we're demonstrating that in my community. But I have not seen that. But this is one of the only times that I have seen that. So just kind of because I think we get so bogged down in like local control or not local control, but actually that's a false choice. So I think reframing it and doing so with your own personal story um, can help.
1,000% agree. And Mark, what you just shared, like this is super useful context. Like, and it makes me think, if you're ever struggling for an action and you are at some sort of, you know, no, it's a little bit harder if maybe you work for the government, but if you're your own independent group, that's a great action. Be like, we did this, like, come join us and support us and help grow this movement. Like, there's, it may, you may want to be a little bit humble or maybe a little shy, but like, don't hesitate to be self-promotional. If you are part of the solution to what you think is the problem, then let people know that and tell them how they can join and how they can help, grow this sort of, this movement.
Thank you guys. That was really helpful.
Of course.
Great. Well, I know we're at time, so we want to let you go. Just before we do, I have dropped a very brief survey into the chat. If you have a moment, it would be really helpful if you can fill out the couple questions in there. That will help us design future programming. And I also just want to emphasize that next week, we have our Housing Talk office hours on Friday, and we're going to talk about storytelling. So we can follow up on the conversations we had here, and I'll make sure that since you joined this event, that you're added to the calendar invitation uh, for next Friday. And here's the dates, and I'll make sure you get the meeting invite. So thank you all so much for participating, especially Katrine, Lisa, Tanya, and Sabrina for speaking up and sharing your experience. And I look forward to staying in touch with you and continuing to work together towards a better housing future for Connecticut.